On Friday, chaos hit the prediction markets as the US launched Operation Epic Fury, which is a joint strike campaign against Iran's military infrastructure launched by the United States and Israel. This is controversial because obviously it's profiting off of war, and $529 million was bet on this market on if the US would strike Iran by a certain date, in this case obviously February 28th. Just on poly market alone, and there's some other related markets that we'll talk about in a minute. This is controversial for 4 reasons, which we'll get into. The first thing is whether or not you should be able to bet on military action. Poly market allows you to bet on direct military action. The next biggest prediction market, Kalshi, does not. You can see here this was an ongoing kind of contract, and people could bet whether or not military strikes by the US would happen by a certain date. If we scroll all the way down here to the 28th, we can see here that as of the 27th, it had fallen to as little as 6.5%, and then right up to 100% there, getting resolved. A lot of people think that we shouldn't be able to place bets on military action. There's obviously operational security issues, and then there's also the issues around death, which we'll look at the next market here. There was a market here for if Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was going to be out by the Supreme Leader of Iran by February 28th. Obviously, again, this market was trending towards down to just 1.9% basically the day before, or even down to less than 1% there just on the morning of the 28th, and then it got resolved as a confirmation came in that he had been killed. This is obviously quite controversial to bet on somebody's death, and actually is not allowed by the CFTC rules around prediction markets. Event Horizon had a great issue this weekend talking about all the kind of different legal issues and aspects that kind of got around with it here, but at least on poly market, right or wrong, if you think you should bet on death, it's clear that he was out by Supreme Leader by the 28th sort of thing. So this market was resolved in what you could say is a kind of clear way. However, on Kalshi, it was a bit more of a mess. What happened here is you can see the odds here that he was going to be out as Supreme Leader before March 1st are only at 9%. And the thing is that they do not allow any betting on death. So you can see $54 million wagered here on it, but most of that was done after it was confirmed, and Kalshi could have left this market open. If you scroll down to the rules, it basically says if Ali Khamenei dies, the market will resolve upon the confirmed reporting of the death based on the last traded price prior to death. This is a bit gobbledygook to me. If that price is unclear, the outcome review committee will determine a fair market value. Basically, Kalshi is just kind of being able to decide what they want to do here. If you do go into their rules, into the full things here, if you open this up, you can see that it does say down here, if leader, these are for all the markets related to leaders being out, and which would also apply to anything related to Trump on Kalshi. If you're betting anything about Trump leaving office, he can't leave office because of death. If the leader leaves solely because they have died, the associated market will resolve. The exchange will determine the payouts to the holders of long and short positions based upon the last traded price prior to death. Again, I don't know when they decide that the death has actually occurred, how they're going to do it. What the CEO of Kalshi actually had to put out a kind of a more of a clarifying statement. I'm just going to read this out here and kind of give my commentary as you go. We don't list markets directly tied to death, which they're actually forbidden to do. When the markets there, when potential outcome involves death, we design the rules to prevent people from profiting from death, and this is what they did here. Again, why the Kalshi market looks so much different from the poly market for this. And he recognizes that some people disagree and prefer that we list these markets without death carve-out because it keeps the rules simple. Again, the poly market one being very simple. And many traditional markets like oil futures can be proxy markets for war and death, but we believe that's different than having a market directly settling on someone's death, which is not allowed by US regulated entities, as I mentioned earlier. What's the point of this market? Well, according to him, a market on Ali Khamenei out as Supreme Leader was important because leadership changes in Iran would have major impact on the world order, geopolitical implications, economic consequences, national security considerations, oil and commodity prices, and it is always possible for a ruler to step down or transition power without death, even in autocracies, and it just happened in Venezuela. Fair point, I suppose. In these instances, we make the caveat clear in the rules. I'm not sure if having the rules kind of buried in here, it's not super clear if you look at the rules down here, that's exactly what's going to happen there, I'd say. Anyway, so they say they're going to improve the UX. They basically resolved this by they reimbursed all fees that people paid on the market. If you had a position from before he died, you'll be paid out on the last traded price before his death. And again, they claim it's clear in the rules. And if you have a position from after death, they're going to fully reimburse your costs. They're trying to make everyone whole here, which I think, given the range of outcomes, is probably about as fair as you can. But this is a really murky kind of markets. I would be very cautious about kind of trading any of these sort of things on Calgary. Probably also be somewhat wary about trading them on Polymarket as well, since the legality of it is very much up in the air. Another controversial aspect of this was what seems to happen every time this goes on is that there were insider trading allegations here. At least 6 Polymarket traders netted over $1 million on the U.S. Iran strike. Again, kind of insider fears here. Again, returning to this, is we're talking about operational security. Going back to Aaron, where we started off here, we're talking about the case for and against war markets. The case against here, he talks about, again, the kind of operational security. And again, a quote here saying, such bets can put your own military at greater risk because you're signaling to your enemies what may happen, and that puts your own troops in danger. I think there's a big question about this sort of thing. The U.S. government, in the case for it, is that it kind of gives you extra information, but of course these markets are publicly available, publicly watchable. If you have information for your own side, you're also potentially going to be able to give it away to others. And finally, our last thing to talk about is just the overall kind of accuracy of prediction markets themselves. I think they've somewhat failed here. If you looked here, this is, again, we're looking at the 28th thing for U.S. strikes on Iran. We need to drop down to, what do we have here, about 7% just a day before, and then it spikes kind of right up. You kind of see it kind of starts spiking here. Somebody probably had some information here, kind of drops down and then goes back up again. I guess you can't really blame people too much for that. Like, we were just one day out. You can see a lot more money was traded here. Almost $100 million just on the things there, which compares to $25 million the day before, $14 million the day before. But I was looking through the history of some of these ones here, and if you look back, you can see here that the sort of, we're back over a month ago, back in January. We have the odds spiking up to, over 68% there on the January 15th. We have it spiking up to over 70% on the 16th, and on the 17th we again have highs of 72%. The odds are really high. At one point somebody obviously thought that something was going to happen, and then it didn't. We're going to get high likelihoods of things happening that turns out to be kind of false positives, and then we have ones that where we didn't get the expected result there. Again, Khamenei out as supreme leader here. Again, if we're looking at just the last week, I mean, if we look a bit further back, you have it here, but the odds were very low until it all of a sudden shot up here. So no one really saw this coming. I'm not really sure the information value would be for this. I'd love to know your thoughts about this. Do you think it's wrong to bet on military action and or the death of people, or do you think we should just let free markets reign? I'd love to hear your thoughts.